You're listening to a Very Spatial Podcast, episode 718, July 23rd, 2023.
Hello and welcome to our Very Spatial Podcast. I am Jesse.
I'm Sue.
I'm Barb.
And this is Frank.
And this week, today as we're recording our 18th anniversary episode. 18. Podcast old enough to vote. Old enough to kick it out of the house. And many other things that happened at 18.
18 for number 718?
Yeah. Was that on purpose?
No.
Just happened?
Yeah.
I guess that's true.
I would have preferred it to be like episode 1000 or something. But apparently on the West Virginia end of things, cats and dogs are running amok.
In the studio.
They're trying to take the camera down. That's what
That's tough.
fascinating with. Yes, 18 years. And I have trouble remembering exactly how many years it is. That's how long it's been. I have to.
At this point, do we need to remember how many it is?
Well, actually, it came up because my current job, they're talking about doing a podcast series, and they pulled me in to consult a bit. And they said, how long have you been doing the podcast? And I was like, 16, 17, 15, 16, 15, 17. And I couldn't remember. I went back and forth. I simply could not remember.
2005. We've been doing it since 2005. Yes, I just said the number 2005.
I know, right?
Mine is because I've been trying to find or reconstruct our Wikipedia page, but we are mentioned in the history of podcasting as one of the earliest with the 2005, which is really neat.
That's cool. I didn't know that. That's cool.
Yeah, we're in the history of podcasting among the earliest podcasts.
That's still going, I would assume.
That's still going?
That are still going.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, we are the old timer.
That's a lot. That's an impressive amount of history in this industry to live through. I mean, Arc Pro didn't even exist when we started, for example.
Arc Map was
8 point something?
Yeah.
8.3 maybe was the current version. Maybe 9 had just came out or about.
No,
I think it was still 8.
It wasn't
yeah.
9.
I think 8.3 probably is pretty close.
Was there a 7 or did it start at 8?
I thought Arc Info
it was,
7 is the only one I remember as 7.
I think it was Arc Info 7 and Arc Map 3 point. Who cares?
Arc View.
Yeah, that was Arc View. Yeah.
Arc View, I mean, 3 point whatever it was. 2.
You're right. That was 3 something.
Okay, so it started at 8. Yeah, so it was in the 8s. And now it'll never get past 10.8.2.
It's a long run, though.
Let's see, I don't remember if QGIS, if it existed, had not gotten anywhere near 1. It was like 0.01 or something like that at that time. UDIG was kind of a big open source GIS, which I think has disappeared since then.
And then
there have been 15 different people who have owned AirDOS since then.
This year, I mean, they get sold so much.
I still remember the talks with OpenStreetMap, in the very early days.
Yeah, we started about a year after OSM, maybe 2. We were all talking about, what was the term? Neogeography.
Yeah, we're talking about
that's right.
Neogeography.
Remember the early days of Glacial and stuff like that? Yeah.
Yeah, Neogeography's kind of faded like, cyber, as a moniker has kind of faded outside of
it's a
cyber.
term.
Oh, yeah.
Let's see. We spent years. I'm just looking at when the iPhone was released because I don't actually know.
It's 2007 or 8. But we were still talking about WebOS. No, it wasn't called WebOS at that point. What was it before whoever bought it and called it WebOS? Palm. It was the Palm.
Yeah,
OS.
June 29th, 2007 was the first iPhone.
Yeah.
And so we predate the iPhone, which is astounding to think about.
But
Modern
iTunes was already
and
from
Android.
the iPod excitement because, of course, we were on iTunes very early on.
Much to Sue's sadness, we predated and very quickly postdated Windows OS. Windows
Yes.
Mobile.
Yes.
Well, but there was also a mobile thing before 2005, like because you had
Oh, right. It was Windows Phone that we predated
Yeah,
posting.
Windows
Like
Phone
Windows
was-
Mobile.
Yeah,
Windows
Windows Phone I
Mobile
didn't
still
really play too much with,
exists.
but Windows Phone I actually liked.
Yeah.
And I just,
Yeah, but back in the day, Windows Mobile was what all of the GPSs were running on, things like that. So if you wanted to run ArcPad, shout out to all the folks in Australia who created and maintained that for a long time, you had to run Windows Mobile.
We did not predate, I don't think, Google Maps,
No.
but we didn't come far after.
I think it was Google Earth. Because remember we were going to talk to
Michael, what's his name?
Dennis Reinhardt, and then we were going to talk to Michael Jones.
Then they couldn't talk to us.
Then they couldn't talk to us because
they'd been
Google had acquired them. Yeah. That's
Right.
going to be one of our first year of interviews, right?
Yep.
So that heady first year or two, we got to interview Peter Morville, Ambient Findability, and then the author of Here There Be Dragons. That was like, what, the second or third year?
No, that was
a further along?
2000. Oh, well, I guess third year, yeah.
Yeah.
2008, 2009, I think. It was the year we went to Comic-Con.
Yeah, that's
2009.
We went to
Yep.
Comic-Con.
This past week we just saw a big touch table, and I was remembering back in
Yeah.
the very beginning when those were starting, we thought everyone would have one. It was so cool, and then they went away, but they're coming back again. Well, the functionality of the new ones have added things that make them just
They're
more
pretty cool.
usable.
Yeah.
They
Well,
tilt and move rather than the ones that were more stable.
yeah, and in this particular one, the big selling point was the price. It, rather than the 20, 30, whatever and up price tag, they're much more obtainable. I couldn't rationalize any level, but we could actually buy one for the house if we wanted to.
You just wanted to have one.
And the nice thing is, it's still one of the nice things then and now is the fact that, whenever we're talking about tablets, we're generally talking about maybe 10 points of recognition, but usually these tables have
20.
enough to
Doesn't it have
recognize like 30, 40 people, or sorry, 33 or 4 people.
Yeah, it's got 20 points of contact, simultaneous contact, and but it was pretty impressive.
Yeah.
I was going to say that's actually something I've been reflecting on when I thought about the 18 years is there seemed to be more robustness in the things we were looking at, more things to do and bells and whistles. But in order to make things more user friendly, more for the masses, they've had to, I guess, like cut out a lot of things have cut out features just to bring in some, I guess, usability, functionality, keep things from breaking all the time. But you get rid of some of those things that are just really cool.
But did people use the things that were cool?
Well, see, I think that was it. They're trying to figure out where that sweet spot is, and you have to put something out there. Because remember when we first got, I think it was at the Esri UC, first got a chance to try an Oculus Rift, right? And it had amazing functionality, nice graphic for the time. It was amazing. But that giant cable that was tethering you, right? I mean, that restricted the use case and the machine that was required to run it. That's just one example, right? It's just amazing stuff. But the caveat was only a limited number of people are going to be able to do this.
We're going to want to do this.
And want to do it, right, in that form factor. And I think we saw that with a lot of the cool things, like you're saying, Barb, is that we got to see the evolution of things. I mean, I think back to when I first got the HoloLens. Loved it. But the HoloLens is not for everybody. There are ergonomic things about it. There are cost things about it. But the idea behind it, right, you have to get it out there and have people try it so that you can then know what those things are for the next generation. And that's why I think we see these things in cycles.
Just to touch on that real quick, the HoloLens is apparently about to launch a new revision that's at least going to go to the military units that are utilizing it. So I'm kind of curious to see what that is going to be made up of, but I don't think it's really been announced how it's going to be different from the current HoloLens 2. So we might be looking at a HoloLens 3 in the near future.
That'd be cool. The HoloLens 2 out of my price range, but the original, like Gen 1 I had.
Which was also the same price.
Yeah, that's what I mean. But I had some help to get the first one, which was not available for the second one. So upgrading, not really an option.
And if we're reminiscing, something that I always find interesting is so you always had gadgets that were like right there, right on the edge. And, we're talking to people who were interested in what they're doing, but then they're interested to see what you've got. And so that was always fun.
And I finally remember my OQO.
Yeah.
And I still remember the last time I saw an OQO was actually as a prop in a TV show.
So some of our listeners who may not have been born yet, I mean, not quite that bad, but I mean, it was a little tiny computer, in its own right, which predated the power of, your Android or your iPhone, smartphone technology. And it ran Windows, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Windows XP, I think is what it came with.
That was the year. Well, that was it, right? It was trying to solve that small form factor, but still have some horsepower to do things. And you could run ArcMap on it. And I used it for some other stuff that I think I played around with the XNA stuff on there, but its form factor was thick and box-like, and the screen slid up. And we tried a few of these things, but I can remember bringing it to the UC one year, and I think that actually there was one that was used there, but it was a way to try to figure out that I need some power with me before we had a lot of the newer processors that coming in the smartphones, right? So this is everybody who's now coming of age in the smartphone things is like, why would you even need this? But it was one of the form factor ways to try to solve some of that. But it had its moment in the sun, and then kind of, it was probably something that was never really going to have a lot of longevity because it was just too quickly surpassed by other things we've seen and now use.
Yeah, I think it was to add one of the interesting things to watch in the technology evolution over the last 18 years, just in computing technology, not to mention as it relates to geospatial, has been the adaptation of existing systems as we understand them and trying to evolve them so they don't change a lot, but you can use them in different contexts. That's a really weird way of saying things like you've got a full keyboard that you can type on, or you've got something that approximates a mouse, or you've got the ability to bring Windows proper into something that traditionally you couldn't have easily carried around with you or taken out into the field. I think it did surprise me a bit when the solution to those problems was a unified OS. So, we mentioned earlier how you've got Mac OS and iOS, they're basically the same thing. And you've got, Windows, some version of basically Windows runs on most platforms now. Form factors now when I say platforms. But they've also got the inclusion of Android apps now into Windows. So, you can run those. So the idea is that, okay, well, let's just not worry about making that hardware work in a different context. Let's make the things that work in that context already work more broadly with greater softwares. So that's kind of exciting change and in my mind, kind of a almost revolutionary different thinking of how to adapt these computing technologies.
And some of it's just the fact that the processor hardware has gotten to the point where it can handle things that we were looking at in 2005, but couldn't do yet. So things like the Steam Deck, where you have this layer of wine translation that's allowing you to run full-on games in Linux while they're basically being interpolated. Not interpolated. What's the word? What's the word I'm looking for?
Emulated.
Emulated. Thank you. So yeah, it's just it just continues to move forward to allow us to do a lot more. And occasionally we break down and say, back when we were learning this, we had to do X and Y as opposed to just telling students, what they're seeing, and the ability to run a buffer on X number of points and it not take overnight is awesome.
Yeah, along those lines, I was just thinking this the other day because I was saying I was having a meeting with somebody that of all the maybe not mundane things, but all the things when I look at over the 18 years that the evolution of storage technology has just been unbelievably amazing. Because again, we've talked about this before, like when we started off, high capacity storage for us, like in our PCs was like a zip disk, which, again, most people are like, well, I don't even know what to talk about. But that evolution, just the other day, I was running a Unity project, right? A 3D game-based project off of an SSD that is maybe just a little bit bigger than a credit card that holds 2 terabytes, and I could literally plug it in via USB-C and run my project so I could have a meeting in a place other than my tricked out, desktop and stuff where I do a lot of my work. And I was just like, it was just so mundane and everyday. And like at one point we were testing the performance and looking at the frame rates and stuff. And the other person said to me, "Are you running that off the SSD?" And I went, "Yes, I am." So literally running this, not even through the main hard drive, but off this SSD. And I thought, oh my God, just how easy is this to just get stuff done? So that just made me think back to just the struggles with and in geospatial, it's just so important, right? When we think back to having to send around, Frank remembers this from his days, where you would have to send a giant hard drive with data if you wanted to pass around remote sensing data and stuff. And even before that, right?
There's still some of that.
Well, there's still even some, actually, that's true. There's still even some of that now, but now it's on an SSD, so it's not quite so heavy. But I just thought about like such a behind the scenes kind of thing, a workaday kind of thing, but it's so different now. And just amazing just how fast that happened.
What surprised me, and part of this is my new job, I don't have to think about things the way I did in my old job, but I needed to access some imagery for my purposes at my new job. And it's a pretty big data set. And I was like, oh, I don't know how much hard drive space this will take. And I thought, I don't care. It's a surface. It's streaming. It doesn't matter. Who cares? It's a question I never ever had to think about. It was like, wow, 10 years ago, this would have been everything. Like what was my analysis at? Well, I don't know how much hard drive space you got, because that's going to tell you how much data you can get, which tells you how much you can actually do now before you offload it to a final product of some sort and then suck in the next batch. That's just something I just don't think about at all. I'm working at a different scale than I did in my last job, but still, even at that scale, it's just like, I don't know, it doesn't matter. It's infinite. Who cares? It's somebody else's hard drive, not my problem. And that's astounding. A massive change over the last 18 years.
What Frank said, though, I guess the other big change is just, again, the amount of data that's available now versus what was available then. And, there's always the issue of, is it in a format that's usable, is in a spatial format, but now it's just even, where is it? Because there's just so much spread out everywhere that before wasn't available for use, which is just astounding when you start to think about how much data people are producing, within the world, and how much more we're going to produce. And then you think about, again, that storage and where it's going to be and metadata and everything's just
the frustration. My patience with it is so much lower than it was 18 years ago. Where it's like, I got to do what to get this data? Oh, this is garbage. Why do I have to do all this work to get the data into something that I need? Whereas that was just 30% of the project, starting out. If you're lucky, it was only 30% of the project. Okay, I got all this junk and I got to get it into something that I can actually do work on. I was railing on social media a couple of months ago or something like that about how annoying the U.S. Census data sets are to get into something useful. And it's just like, why is this so terrible? And they've got this really cool viewer now for like exploring data, and it's almost all tabular data. It has a map component, but a big part of the census data customers are non-map people. They're just trying to do analysis, economists and whatever, statisticians and things like that. But their tools are much better than they were 5 years ago. But even now I'm like, oh, this is so annoying. And it's just funny to me how little patience I have for data publishers. Get this into something useful.
Well, I think the evolution of user experience in all of these technologies that we've talked about, utilized ourselves over the years, has definitely been a huge thing. Because you're right. I mean, back in the old days, you had to literally be a statistician to even read the documentation to get certain data sets. Just like, what? And I remember Data Ferret, it was an attempt to try, but as exposure to user experience, right, and understanding that the user base is broader, and it's going to be people that can't, go out and get a separate advanced degree to figure out how to use your data or to use your tools, then that evolution has helped all of us. But you're right, it's also shortened our acceptable window that it would take to do things, I think. Because back, we laughed about it over the years, right? That, I can remember setting buffers and then going home and hoping that it doesn't bail during the night, right? And come back and hopefully see a result. That world, for the types of analysis that we do or processing, doesn't really exist anymore for most people. And so with it has changed. So the benefits of the evolution in our tool sets also means that you're right, our perspective on how things should work changes too. And that's been kind of cool. And sometimes, as you're right, frustrating to see when you find a legacy thing or something that's what do you mean I can't just download this now? Or I find too, when I am downloading things, like, how did I just use up 850 gigabytes on this drive? Like, where even is it? Because that's just the scale at which we're working now. And it's so easy to do.
Well, I mean, more often than not, is 850 gigabytes. I don't even notice it. It's like, if it's got a G in its file sizes, I'm like, it's tiny. It's irrelevant. It's like, call me when you got something that's measured better in terabytes. Then I go, oh, okay, I got to think about that. I mean, that's amazing. Just the scale of that data that we can utilize, not think about, is really amazing.
So just to go back to something Sue mentioned earlier, at the time that we started, 100 megabytes of a zip file, maybe, how big did a Jazz drive get? Was that 1 gig?
I don't know. It was too rich for my blood.
Yeah, and they didn't last very long.
No.
But we'll call it 650 megabytes on a DVD, right? And that was where we were. That was a big amount of data, and we weren't pushing that across the network a lot of times. We were carrying that from room to room.
Can we just back up a second? I just want to clarify a point, because Jesse just said the completely appropriate term, but people may have not paid attention. Megabytes. That's 650 megabytes, which is a scale number that you may not have been thinking about. So many of our listeners just kind of mentally went, oh, giga. No, megabytes.
That we had to walk around the building. So if we had a big data set, we had to have multiple CDs, DVDs, and carry them around. I guess DVDs go up to something gigabytes. So I was probably thinking
5
CD.
gigabytes. Well, I mean, the first major data set for West Virginia that was aerial acquisition was in CDs, and it took literally an entire cabinet that was 3 foot wide, long. I think the drawers are 2 foot, I think, deep, and then the whole thing was 3 feet tall, something like that. Or it was either 40 by 30 or it. I mean, it was a pretty big metal drawers, and it was full. It was 2 of them actually full of CDs that held DOQQs, which are pretty coarse imagery. By today's standards, they're useless and impossible to use, but at the time they were amazing. And those were all in CDs. And it took us at the tech center, it took us months of man hours to copy this to CDs. And what would happen is that you would call in, like Sue said, even at that time when I first started, it wasn't send a hard drive. It was, I'm going to burn you a couple CDs. So I need this, quad of whatever county. I was like, okay, well, that's going to be $50 in CDs. That's, and we're talking about a quad, what you see on a topo sheet. That was the imagery. So it's a very different data management and data replication paradigm going back 18 years ago.
Yeah, can we mourn a little bit for that lost data, but also all the work that people put into it, that as things were being transitioned, sometimes people just decided it wasn't worth the effort, or it was hard, or, just things got lost over time that we don't even know. What's out there that we might be looking for that was once existed but isn't there anymore to be used.
It all comes back to ambient findability, doesn't it?
Well, nobody's looking in the closet where that particular CD is stored, so that's not made it online yet.
Yeah. So to Barbara's point, though, let's take a minute to think about the lost capability. All right. So a lot of this data would be recorded originally, collected, and saved in a projection, for example, like a UTM or something like that, which has, a comparatively high quality and accurate data. We all know it's wrong-ish. It's just the degree of ish. and we could do calculations based upon that. We could do analyses based upon that. But the needs of, I'm going to use the word needs, but you can argue, you can push back against that word, of making this stuff web accessible meant we moved to WGS84 for all the data, which does everything. But it does everything. That's the nice thing about it. And we've lost the degree of accuracy. But I can't think of the last time I've really seen a data set that was available in something like UTM, which is very useful for a place like West Virginia. And because almost all of West Virginia is in one UTM. So it's good for data calculations. We don't tend to have that. And I have to think about, okay, having to deal with projections as just part of the workflow. That's just something we've all kind of galvanized towards a more inaccurate world because of the variety and breadth of data availability.
We have all of this in terms of the data end of things, but there's also the visual end of things, and moving not just to the WGS84, but using Web Mercator as the projection. We had tried so hard to get away from Mercator because we're not guiding ships anymore. We're not trekking routes across the ocean as we're using these technologies. Why are we using something that makes right angles for places that don't need to be right angles? Why do we have all this? Why is Greenland suddenly giant again?
Well, you had to pick a thing, right? And, because they were making an interface for the masses. And
because they were not geographers.
Well, there's that too. But again, what could you not critique any other one that you would pick for? Well, why are you using this? Because it distorts the relative shapes, or whatever. Projections are always a trade-off, and I don't know we know as geographers you can't pick one true projection, so you would have to have an interface that would allow you to swap those out dynamically for what you're trying to do, and then most people are like, I'm out. They're not going to bother with, they're not going to wrap their head around it. So
yes, but the number of college students who think Greenland is really big.
I'm not saying it's a positive thing. I'm saying I can understand for the eighth grade educated general human being, there is a map, not 80 maps, depending on what you're trying to answer and what degree. And so I get why they picked one projection, and I can understand why they picked Mercator. But at the same time, there's a lot of side effects that are just, we should have been working on from day one to go, but this is just one way to look at it. There could be others.
And you can. I mean, don't get me wrong. Even in online mapping, you can use other projections. So not to say that we are stuck with that, which is people tend to default to it because it has been made the default. But yeah, that's my complaint about it more than the lat long, because I can always convert lat long back to something else.
But I mean, we can argue a lot of that we did back in, we've had the conversation about that geography background of what it means when you're using stuff, because I think that and I mentioned this too, right? The shocker was seeing that projection used for the first few times, like a TV weather or the Weather Channel, all right, and looking at and going, wait, that's a Mercator, and seeing that transition from more common projections used, say since we're in the U.S. for North America and stuff, and just people not knowing that hadn't been how traditionally we'd represented things visually, cartographically. So, but it seems like it's a subtle thing. But I mean, I'm trying to think now. The last time I actually saw, conical, like an Albers, which is a common one, or one of those that are used.
Doesn't matter.
And but anyway, now I'm going to say, hey, I haven't. But yeah, I mean, those things too. I thought when you said visually, you're going to go more with the evolution and how we visualize the world in general. And
no, that's awesome.
Yeah, that's been great. So another thing over the years, which of course we follow closely and participated in our own stuff. But I was just reminded how far we came when I guess we were sitting at VerySpatial, South Carolina or whatever, and watching YouTube, and we saw a demo for, what was it, Unreal? Was it Unreal? And Cesium and stuff, looking at real world data and game engines again. And just how easy they made it sound. Of course, you got to know how to use Unreal, and you got to know a few other things, but just that part too has just been amazing over the last almost 2 decades, to see just what we can do now in terms of representing the world, that we could all dream about before. I think there were plenty that, kind of saw that vision, but just to see how far that's come, or I cannot convey the childlike glee that I had when a project that I had done in Unity, just a very simple, small little landscape, I was able to port into the new Steam Deck, like handheld, and show it to somebody that I was actually playing a thing I had made, and just that the technology had reached a point where it could allow me to do it. And I think that over the last 18 years has really been just one of the most amazing things.
I'm going to throw out a hot take that I'm sure that everyone's going to go, he's wrong. But I actually think that one of the more astounding things to me has been the growth of spatial literacy within the population. And I use the word spatial on purpose, not geographic literacy, but they're linked, obviously, but spatial literacy. I think people have an expectation because of the widespread use of these technologies that there's a spatial component, that they can think about things spatially. Show me on the map. What's the map look like? How's this work on the map? Let me pull up what's near me, what's around here, what's good around here, those type of questions just seem a little more on the front and a little more talked about. I was thinking about, when you're talking about the Unity and stuff like that, I was like, what a big driver is this is everybody expects a game to have a decent map. And even games that, the logic of the system, I'm exploring, medieval ages. Well, why would you have this map that you can just pull up where you can annotate and put things on? I mean, that's just not, people just didn't walk around like that normally. It was at the time, but you have to have that in a game. And the notion that, pull out Google Maps and it'll tell you how to get there or where something is at. That's I think potentially revolutionary that we're willing to think about that, even though we still make basic geographic mistakes of, where's Florida, and that type of stuff. Those are the celebrated things, but I think that we've gotten an increase in spatial literacy in the last 18 years. And I think that's great.
Now, compared to 2005, I had, of course, lots of students who were like, oh, I'm terrible at reading maps back in 2005. Now, no, nobody has said that in years. Yeah.
I mean, I think that they get frustrated when there's new norms and they don't necessarily know how to adapt. And it's a little weird to do, admittedly, but if you have a north arrow that points off to the right and they automatically go, okay, well, that way's north. And go, well, no, actually you have to look at the compass. It does the way this particular map is oriented. That way is north, not that way. So they do miss little things like that. But I mean, that's that's arguably the cartographer not thinking about how people are now been trained to think about these things.
Yeah. Something I've been thinking about is also the evolution of components. And I was thinking about this because in the early days, when you have mice, and you have the mouse and you're using it, how much it's changed and become part of the tool set. But also, like Sue was talking about things that we thought it was going to do. And I remember the roller balls. The balls in there. And I even know they had the one that people were able to use with their feet, which was amazing. And just all the ways that people in the geospatial community were each time there was a new iteration of a mouse that was supposed to just make your life easier. People gravitating towards it because it's a inexpensive way to try to improve your workflow. So just even as simple as, how components have changed.
I think that too, and I think they're another one that and again we've talked about this too, is that the vision outstrips maybe the limitations of what you can make happen. So we always wanted every one of those tools to be like the revolutionary way that we could get, and there are lots of visions of it to get towards the holodeck or the vision of collaborating with the space around you and those types of things. But we have seen a lot. I mean, leap motion, gesturing, touch screens, all of those have really become consumer. Maybe not the Leap Motion, but a lot of those things have become consumer level types of products and technologies that certainly weren't really there back in the days when we were super excited about things like the Space Mouse and stuff like that. But that remains, like, I think, a little bit of a challenge of how we interact with computing and geospatial data, right? How we handle that, and we kind of envision that on-demand thing where the screen is around you, and voice control or something like that, where you just have this kind of real-time situational study of the world around you. And so, I would agree. It's just like every time you're trying to, like, is this the one that's going to get us a little closer? And so I've always been excited to try them when I can, and always frustrated when it's not quite what I was hoping for, but still anxious and excited for the next one.
Well, I think it gets you a step closer every time, right? I mean, that's the nice thing. One of the things that I think has been a subtle but important one is the I was going to use the word portability. That's not entirely accurate, but basically transferability, I guess. When you move from one platform and then you go pick up another device and then it goes, oh yeah, we were working on this, let's continue on it, and it's just, that doesn't work perfectly. And it can be very frustrating in some contexts, but the fact that somebody considered that and they've actually implemented it in a somewhat functional way is pretty exciting to me, that you can just go, oh, I need to get moving around. I'm gonna pick up my tablet, and boom, you're still doing whatever it is you're doing. And I think that's another example of the minor evolution towards the let me interact with knowledge and information the way I need to this second, and then don't get too bogged down about saving it, loading it over here, or whatever it may be.
Yeah, and every one of those that works, it's right. It's one of the things is like, I can't go back now. I've now been able to interact like this, and I can't go back. So,
but a counterpoint to that is that part of what's creating our issue with information literacy. That we've made it so easy to do some of these things that people aren't comfortable trying to find certain aspects on their own anymore. Especially with the wealth of data that's out there. People kind of fall back a lot to what they already know.
Well, and they uncritically, this is a whole big problem, and it's a whole separate, series of podcasts we do, but they don't necessarily think critically about the data they can get access to and say, wait, does that make sense? Is the average elevation change in West Virginia really only 5 feet? That doesn't make sense. So, it's just kind of, oh, okay, wait a minute. I got to think about this for a half a second. And it's just because somebody can very easily take a piece of data and manipulate it and make it available, right? So you can republish things very easily, which is very powerful and exciting, but also potentially dangerous if you don't engage some of that digital literacy capabilities. And that's always a challenge.
Yeah, and I mean, think of stuff that hasn't made it. As we talked about the missing data in the drawers of CDs, right? Or tools that were already specialized, but require somebody to kind of figure things out. And I think that the ease of use sometimes takes that away. But I was just thinking of a discussion. Oh gosh, must have been like a few months ago about reading microfiche. All right, something if you're not in the professional world, or maybe if you studied Landy, like do some of those types of things, you're professional, like you won't know what I'm talking about. But essentially, microfiche and microfilms were old ways to capture documents. And they're not digital, they're like on a film, and you have to have a special machine to go back. And a lot of these things are being made digital, but some of these collections are, like local newspapers and all kinds of documents like that. And the person involved had sent somebody to look up something in microfiche, and they couldn't figure out how to work the machine, so they gave up. They just said, no, I'm not even going to do it. And it's like a more extreme example, but I think that you can see some of that when you will gravitate towards information and workflows, right, that you feel comfortable with. And so it has fueled the push to get more and more stuff into those formats so people can still access them. And we've seen over the years so many amazing efforts to digitize and to create digital versions of data sets. And I mean, we've talked about tons of them, can't mention them here. I mean, look at anything in the U.S. from the Library of Congress or, other things that have passed on. Smithsonian has this amazing 3D object database. I mean, and you just go, around the world and look at amazing projects like that. But they've been paralleling a lot of the changes that we've seen in the years of the podcast. And so the world that we can access in a digital form is just so much more vast now. But it also does mean that for those things that kind of are in the other formats, that it is becoming more difficult maybe to work in those worlds, those analog types of tools.
Well, we're still in an era where I'm going to get the statistics wrong, but I heard recently, was it 90% of all data that was generated in human history has been generated in the last 30 years or something like that. I didn't verify that data, so don't quote me on that. That's accurate, but it does seem like the volume of data that we're generating in the modern era is significantly higher than we have throughout most of human history, which creates its own challenges. And how do we get this stuff into mediums and forms that we can engage with in a meaningful way? And you can see how older pieces are going to get dropped off from the radar much quicker and fall into disuse and not be able to connect to it very easily. There was an article that was it's been 20 plus years ago now that talked about there's this whole archive of digital stuff that is a whole group that deals with how do we keep these technologies running, because they all break, and the companies that make them in 20, 30, 40 years won't exist, much less the person who did it and knows how to repair it may not be alive, so you've got nobody to work from to fix some of these technologies. So how do we make something digital that's effectively as eternal as a piece of paper, even though paper of course breaks down, but still we have paper documents that go back thousands of years at some level that we can engage with. So it's a whole industry problem. And at the rapid pace of change in data collection and publication, it's a huge problem. Barbara made an allusion to, not allusion, she talked about the Internet Archive and how we show up the VerySpatial one. Well, we used to have a wiki page and then it went away. That's an example of information that's lost. That how do you get this back? How do you maintain it? How do you keep your own processes and your own information around it so you can use it and reference it, so somebody can use it and reference it? And that's a huge industry problem that we're grappling with, and it's evolved a lot in the last 18 years, I think, to be almost worse than it was when we started. I kind of feel like we had an awareness of it, and now I kind of feel like we're sitting it's on the cloud. So the cloud will always be cloudy and have clouds, and that's not true. We have to make positive steps to make that happen.
Yeah, when I was thinking of what Frank said and everyone else said, again, when I was reflecting on 18 years, one of the things I was thinking about was how it's the people that haven't changed. Like everything's changed so much in terms of technology, but that a lot of times the geospatial community is who the geospatial community is. That, again, we tend to be a lot of times highly specialized to an area, but there's not enough people to go around, that there are workflows that you do. I was just thinking about how the similarities to when you talk to people about what they're doing and how they're doing it today are very similar to how they were still 18 years ago, even if things have sped up in terms of you can do it more efficiently, that a lot of times how they're working and the challenges are similar. And I think that does go back to the fact that geography and geospatial, they're interconnected and interlinked. So you have those concepts that underlie everything, but also you have those underlying work processes and the just feeling or outlook on the world. I guess, is there a geospatial outlook that you've seen over the past 18 years? I think a lot of geospatial people tend to be very curious. They ask questions. They, think about a lot of things in a wide context, in a spatial context, than other people do.
They're spatial nerds.
Yeah, I was trying not to say spatial, but yeah, very enthusiastic.
And I was have to say I was thinking because we could reminisce all day, but of course the episode has to wrap up at some point. But I was going to say that one of my highlights of the last 18 years, and there were tons of them, just amazing things that we have gotten to do because of the podcast, and it's been a struggle sometimes. Life gets in the way and things like that. But of all the great things we got to do, people got to meet. I think one of the ones that was the most fun were the VerySpatial get-togethers that we had for a few years at the Esri user conference, because that was a place where a lot of geospatial people were coming together, and just a chance to see and talk to people that actually, that listen to the podcast, but to be in that enthusiasm and that stuff like that. So if we had to say, what's a memory that you want to pick out, I'd have to say for me, that would be near the top of the list, and getting to see Elvin Slavic and lots of
everybody
whose
name you've suddenly forgotten because it's been 10 years since we've done it.
Yeah.
Some people retired, which is,
Yeah, but that's okay because we remember.
So I want to end on this little remembrance note, which is 1 year, Jesse, who plays guitar, which people don't realize because he didn't talk about it much. He's not like me. I'm always talking about guitar. But he's played guitar since you were a teenager, right?
Sure.
Yeah. And 1 year, he and a friend of his played music at one of our VerySpatial live shows, which was really cool. I think you played. I know your friend played. I remember that.
Yeah, Mark did, but I don't
Yeah,
remember.
I was going to say, that was when Mark came, yeah.
Yeah, I thought you played. It doesn't matter. The weird thing is I literally had a dream about a week and a half ago where, because I've never performed live ever, playing guitar, and we were at a VerySpatial live show, and I was expected to perform, and of course, being a dream, I didn't go well, but that's neither here nor there. But it was interesting, with the 18-year that was a really cool memory of mine that actually made it into a recent dream. So,
okay, so if we do a 20th anniversary show, then you now have to perform.
Yeah. Oh, that would not be good.
You got 2 years. I'll pass it on.
Getting recognized in the elevator at a conference was kind of cool too, but the details are fuzzy on that. But those were kind of fun.
It was the second Wear 2.0 conference, I think.
Second Wear 2.0, so you remember more specifically than me.
Folks from the Ordnance Survey.
My voice got recognized at a UC once.
Nice. I
said something to somebody. Barbara maybe. I don't remember who I was talking to. I just said something, and they were like, "Hey, are you Frank from VerySpatial?" I was like, "Yeah." like, I recognize your voice. I was like, "That's kind of neat."
Yeah. All right. Well, as we close, I just want to say thank you to everyone out there for listening and for 18 years of getting to do cool topics and interviews and visits and all kinds of stuff.
Sue's turning this into a thing.
What do you mean a thing?
Like a
So how would the people get a hold of us if they wanted to talk about the 18 years?
Well, if they want us to know about events, they can email us their events at podcast@veryspatial.com.
And if you'd like to reach us individually, I can be reached. That's right. The podcast outlasted my participation in Twitter. You can reach me at sue@veryspatial.com.
I can be reached at frank@veryspatial.com, and I can be reached on all the social medias at Nojapar, and I'm actually on Threads. So, there's that.
I'm barb@veryspatial.com.
I'm available at Kind of Spatial, and of course, if you want to find all of our contact information, head over to veryspatial.com/contacts.
As always,
we're the folks from VerySpatial.
Thanks for listening.
We'll see you in a couple weeks.